Welcome to the Ezra Digital 2021 Education Series. Before we get started, there are a few items we need to go over so you get the most out of your participation in today's event. All attendees have been muted for this presentation. Please close all windows on your screen except for the presentation. You may submit questions at any time by using the questions pane of the control panel, and we will address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's program. Our speakers will attempt to address all questions. However, if time does not permit, you may submit your questions to ezra@esignrecords.org, and they will be forwarded to our speakers after the program. I would now like to turn it over to Steve Bisbee.
Thank you, Melanie. Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Steve Bisbee, founder of eOriginal, a provider of a leading digital transaction management platform for financial services. I oversaw the development of unique digital solutions that have replaced paper processes, expedited transactions, and created business process efficiencies for over 600 clients in a digital financial ecosystem. The Electronic Signature and Records Association was formed to educate and advocate for the use and acceptance of digital signatures, records, and transactions. I've been on the Ezra board since its inception. Ezra members are dedicated to providing, promoting, and participating in the Ezra values of expertise, leadership, collaboration, accessibility, and technology neutrality. As part of Ezra's educational mission, this is our second annual education series. The intention of the education series is to provide insight and practical guidance on the business, technology, and legal implementation issues that arise across a wide spectrum of use cases. Although e-sign and other enabling legislation were enacted over 20 years ago, there's still a learning curve as companies continue to transform their business practices. These issues are even more critical during this time of continued social distancing, remote work, and contactless consumer engagement. We hope you will find these webinars useful. Today, well, once in a century, a company has the opportunity to change how the world works. At Notarize, they've set out to redefine what trust looks like in the digital age. They believe that every transaction online deserves to be safe and secure for future generations. Providing legal online notarizations, the Notarize platform is available 24/7, allowing you to get documents notarized at your convenience, anytime, anywhere. I'm now going to turn the program over to Nicole Booth, the Executive Vice President, Public Affairs at Notarize, to introduce the rest of our panel today. Nicole?
Thank you, Steve, and thank you, Ezra, and thank you, attendees. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are today. I am Nicole Booth, Executive Vice President of Public Affairs for Notarize. As Steve said, Notarize is a digital trust provider that integrates technology with live human interaction to transform how people verify identities and conduct business online. And we start with notarizations. I'm very excited to introduce you to the public affairs team at Notarize, who will be presenting this webinar. To save time, I'm going to quickly provide their names and titles before moving on to the content. First, in our government affairs vertical, we have Kim Gatica, AVP, Head of Government Affairs, Kernard Jones, Director of Government Affairs. In our policy, public sector, and industry relations vertical, we have Charlie DeVries, AVP, Public Sector Relations, Matt Cameron, Head of Financial Services Policy, Casey Garber, Director of Auto Policy and Industry Relations. In our community engagement vertical, we have Jacqueline Phillips, Head of Notary Engagement and Education. In our public affairs communications vertical, we have James Fulgenzi, Public Affairs Communications. And then we have Julie Flanagan, who keeps our trains running as our program coordinator.
Thanks, Nicole. So I'll kick things off here to discuss a little bit about how digital services have helped to create a more accessible world. So over 50 years ago, when the internet was first created, it helped to solve one of society's biggest gaps at the time: instant global communication. Today, technology has the power to close many of the gaps, better known as disparities, that still exist today to create a more accessible future. Our collective reliance on digital services was only exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. As we were asked to shelter in place and transition our everyday lives remote, digital services help to keep us connected and our business and social lives moving forward. COVID-19 has certainly been a defining moment, and the world will forever be defined as what came before and what came after the pandemic. Whether you are living with a disability or live in a rural area without public transportation, digital services are key to making life's most essential needs more accessible. Today, we're going to talk about the state of digital services, what to expect in the future, and how digital services will help to create a more accessible world for everyone.
Thanks, James. And worth mentioning on this slide, it is Digital Inclusion Week. That was started by the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and it's an annual campaign to raise awareness around digital empowerment and the gaps that exist in digital access and equity. So in honor of that week, we were able to put this presentation together for Ezra as an education experience. So our conversation here today is more timely and important, and we thank you for joining us as we raise awareness during this important week. The pandemic served as a proving ground for many technologies working towards mass adoption. As we moved our lives online, many technologies that were waiting in the wings soon took center stage. Services like remote medical treatment, food, and grocery delivery services, online schooling, and of course, remote work have entered the mainstream and are likely to be here to stay. The digital, sorry everyone, the sectors that are digital have helped to increase accessibility of these goods and services to the millions of Americans who are compromised and struggle with a mobility impairment or simply lack access to reliable or public transportation. While the pandemic helped propel us in the right direction, there is still a lot of work to be done.
Thank you, Nicole. The pandemic also served as a wake-up call. As we moved our lives online, many of the disparities present in a fully digital society soon came to surface. Conversations about increasing accessibility features or the digital divide became top of mind for organizations across the country. One study conducted by the International Association of Accessibility Professionals and the G3 ICT research showed 83% of respondents reported that COVID-19 raised the profile and the importance of digital channels within their organization. For more than 62% of the respondents, COVID-19 increased their awareness of the impact of accessibility on digital channels. More than 1/3 of the respondents have heard reports that users with disabilities are having increased difficulty accessing services during the pandemic.
There we go. Thanks, Kennard. So many of these services have helped to solve certain disparities like gaps in access to transportation, healthcare, schooling, banking, and much more. But as we transition into a fully digital world, we need to be focused on the communities that may be left behind. Industry leaders should remain cognizant of the communities that are at risk. And so if we fail to build organizations and products that work for everyone, for example, the greater our reliance becomes on internet connected devices, the harder we need to work towards solving the digital divide. This includes everything from access to affordable high-speed broadband to access to smart devices and increasing digital literacy. We also need to keep in mind about those with physical disabilities, ones that make using a keyboard or mouse difficult, or those who are blind or hearing impaired. And we need to make sure that our products and services are built with the accessibility features needed to ensure equal access. We also need to consider the financial burdens that can exist in this transition. Access to things like state-of-the-art smart devices or high-speed broadband all come at a cost. And the more reliant our society becomes on these items, we need to make sure that they come at an affordable price point. And lastly, an all digital society will likely evolve to be a cashless one. About 10% of American adults are unbanked. And it's also not surprising that roughly the same percentage of Americans are also credit invisible, meaning that their credit history is so limited that they don't have credit scores, or if they do have a score, it is not based on a complete history of debt repayment. So I really feel passionately that we need to be thinking hard and working towards solutions for this community.
Sorry for the delay. Thank you, Matt. Having technical issues on my end. So the next slide we're going to go over is the government's role in shaping what's next. As mentioned earlier, many of the accessibility issues we have discussed here today were only exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Over the past year and a half, the government has stepped up to help bridge the digital divide. In 2021, Congress appropriated over $3 billion to the FCC to help low-income households pay for broadband services and connected internet devices through the FCC Emergency Broadband Benefit Program. As of October, over 6 million US households had enrolled. Over $2 billion still remains unavailable for disbursement, so please spread the word. The House version of the 2021 infrastructure bill would earmark $65 billion toward expanding broadband internet access. The bipartisan infrastructure package includes over $2 billion for the Digital Equity Act, which will help state governments address issues of equity in internet access for historically underserved communities, fund internet accessibility projects, including Wi-Fi hotspots and digital literacy programs.
And just to continue with that, Kim, going forward, public-private partnerships remain a great way for industry to work together with government partners to help shape the future. By working together with the government, we can collaborate to solve these complicated problems and work to create a digital world that is even more accessible than the world today. Sometimes the first step is starting the conversation.
And the lessons we learned from the pandemic and the new developments in digital services have the potential to create a more accessible future.
Both remote work and remote services have already helped to bring accessible accommodations into the mainstream. Expanding existing work from home policies or adopting a hybrid model is one way organizations can make their workplaces more accessible for people with disabilities. Government agencies like state DMVs are looking for ways to continue or expand the ability to conduct transactions remotely, which would allow people who need to stay at home for a variety of reasons to maintain access to important government services.
And let's look at some of those assistive technologies. Screen readers are the first one on the list there. Screen reading and screen enlargement softwares can help those with visual disabilities access online information. Braille devices translate languages it captures into Braille so that blind and visually impaired individuals can read, study, and learn on their own. Voice command technology can help those with learning, speech, dexterity, or vision impairments. Examples include something as simple as text to speech. Smart home devices can help those who struggle with mobility, turn lights off and on, set alarms and timers, and open doors, all by speaking a command out loud.
So on increasing government funding for broadband, the $65 billion in funding for broadband infrastructure and digital accessibility projects in the infrastructure package may have the single greatest impact on bridging the digital divide available to us today. This investment will help millions of Americans who are disproportionately impacted by a lack of access to broadband, namely communities of color, rural communities, and low-income households. Without reliable access to broadband, we risk leaving a generation of Americans behind, creating wider disparities in digital literacy, job preparedness, and so much more.
Thanks, Nicole. And then to talk about us as a company at Notarize, First, we would like to share one important detail about our company organization and culture. Notarize is a remote-first company, meaning we're fully remote with office locations like our Boston headquarters that employees can visit if and when they want. We have employees who work in all corners of the United States, and today we have 300 plus employees across 35 states, including DC. We were quick to adopt the remote first model in early 2020. As mentioned earlier, with the help of technology, a remote workplace offers a ton of flexibility and convenience to your employees who have varying needs, helping to create a more accessible workplace.
Jackie, I think you're on mute.
I am. It told me that. It's very smart. I'm here as the first notary on Notarize. So remote online notarization, otherwise known as RON, is very dear to me. It's a modern form of notarization that allows anyone to appear before a commissioned notary public via a secure audio and technology and get their documents notarized legally. As a remote first company and a remote first service, RON brings the notary directly to the consumer wherever they are. By making this identity verification process accessible from a computer, a tablet, or even a smartphone, RON has helped expand access to notarization, a process that could have remained a barrier to homeownership or other important financial services. Notarize is committed to improving the accessibility of our product. We start first with individualized signer experiences to ensure it works for those with disabilities. We have added accessible keyboard navigations. We're working to integrate a screen reader experience. That means that signers will be able to use our product with the keyboard if they're unable to use a mouse, or soon with a screen reader if they're blind. You can also use Notarize's iPhone and Android apps with each device to provide accessible features for vision, hearing, and mobile impairments. We are proud to offer our Spanish language functions and notaries by making our platform more accessible to non-English speaking users. Notarize is working on integrations that will allow us to offer additional languages in the future as well. RON more broadly will allow people with mobility or physical disabilities to greater access to notarial services, those with compromised immunities with one less potential life-threatening interaction, those who live in remote areas or lack access to reliable transportation, access to notarial services using their smartphones, those with busy life schedules or non-traditional work hours, access to notarial services 24 hours, 7 days a week, and increase fraud prevention and security measures that enhance the traditional notarization while making the process more accessible.
So we went through that presentation really fast. And I think what's really important here and what the team is trying to get across is on digital access, on digital inclusion, the country is trying to make grounds, and we have a long way to go. And so weeks like Digital Inclusion Week to raise awareness of these issues and the gaps that remain in the communities are essential to the work that we all should be doing as technology organizations. So I do want to thank Ezra. I want to thank Stephen Bisbee, and I would like to thank the public affairs team at Notarize for doing this public service announcement and sharing some thoughts on how Notarize looks at digital access and some of the activity at the federal, state, local, and in industry levels. We do have lots of time actually for questions, which isn't always usually the norm. So I will pause and see if there are any questions from any of the attendees.
So this is Steve Bisbee. If you have any questions, you can submit them via the questions pane. Please feel free to do so.
All right, Mallory. I think that we do not have any questions, and I know that we spent 20 minutes. I thought it was a well spent 20 minutes going through digital access, digital equity, and raising the level of awareness. So I will pass it back to Stephen and Mallory for any last minute comments moving forward.
Nicole, thank you very much. And thank you all for sharing, which really is valuable information and content. So we have a lot more great content coming up in the Digital 2021 Educational Series. You can find out more about Ezra and the series on Ezra's website at www.esignrecords.org. Of course, we hope that you would join Ezra for gaining the benefit of our combined expertise of our members, and also support our advocating for a trusted digital economy for all. Our public policy initiatives, as you can see here, include Notary, of course, as one of our primary focuses under Nicole's group, but also electronic will legislation, the working with the Federal Reserve banks and the Federal Home Loan banks. In the automotive area, we have a very active e-titling group. And of course, there's a lot of interest in blockchain and digital ledger technology and how these may be utilized beyond just supply chain utilizations in financial services. So again, if you have any questions about the series or Ezra, please feel free to reach out to myself or Margot Tank, who is my co-chair of this series. And again, on behalf of Ezra and our speakers, I thank you very much for joining us today.